Join her then.
Oh, funny.
It's 3. Here.
Starting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Wendy, you want to take the roll call?
Mike Hobson.
Here.
Marilyn Bertley.
Here.
Deborah Nelson.
Here.
Don Manny.
Here.
Jan Schweddy.
Here,
Jessica Stickles.
Here.
Michelle Bly.
Here. Can you hear us all okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it looks like I'll be doing the approval of this one. Madam Mayor, I'd like to approve the retreat agenda as presented.
Second.
question?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll jump right into our retreat. And our first up is, and the only item on here is a discussion on a regional fire authority. And I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. Thank you, Council, for attending our retreat today. I know we originally had this scheduled back in April, and we were hoping if we pushed it out a little bit, we would be past the point of virtual meetings and back in chamber together. But that didn't work out, and we needed to have the discussion, so brings us to today. If you can start with your slide deck that we handed out on page 2. We can just go through these and stop and answer questions anytime you have one, so don't hesitate to ask. Today, what we're after is just a go, no-go indication from council as we proceed through discussions on annexing our fire department into the North County Regional Fire. We don't have all of the answers today. We're just at a point where we're going to have some discussion based on information that I've heard from council that they were interested in hearing. Some of the things we don't have today that we won't be able to discuss is we don't have the full picture on the financial data, which means what we've created here today is to look at the impact on to the taxpayers in Arlington on an annexation versus no annexation. That was something that we heard from council that they were interested in hearing. What we don't have put together is some of the cost assumptions for the actual new RFA. Those will be coming to you in the next couple of months if we're all in agreement to move forward after today. Another thing is getting 100% of the operations. Both the chiefs are working on our operational scenarios, and that'll be coming forward to you also in the next couple of months. And nor will we be making a final decision on whether we're going to move forward with the RFA or not, just because, like I said, we don't have all the information that we need, but we do have enough that we have some important points to discuss today. On page 3, we have some assumptions. We just wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with this. The first one is all council members are comfortable with what an RFA is and why Arlington considers this as an option. It's an assumption, yeah. So
Check in and see if your assumption is correct.
yeah.
Well, let me interject as the facilitator. It's a little bit different scenario for me to facilitate a retreat like this, but what Paul and I discussed was we would go through these assumptions and try to confirm with council that these assumptions are understood by council. And so let's just do them kind of one by one as we go through this. Kind of a show of hands. Does everybody feel like they're comfortable with their understanding of what an RFA is and why we're considering this? Anybody have any discussion they'd like under that first assumption?
do you want us to raise our hand if we agree? Is that,
That would be helpful, but perhaps not necessary. Depends on how many people wish to speak at one time.
oh, okay. No, I'm good with moving on.
Oh, I'd just like to get a statement as to exactly why Arlington is considering this step so that it's very, very clear in my mind as to why we're doing this.
This is one option that we've discussed about creating a sustainable financial model for the fire department and gaining extra benefits, service benefits from the economy of scale of being part of a regional fire authority versus trying to do our own fire service within the city. We're kind of a dwindling breed. There isn't very many cities left out there that are providing fire service on their own. Most of them have found that the economy of scale, the level of service they can provide, and the cost to the versus the cost to the taxpayers is beneficial to be part of a larger organization.
Okay, well, I guess I have a question then, because of my understanding when I went through this packet here last evening is that the cost is actually going to be higher once we go into this.
Yeah, and we'll go through those. That's exactly why we're here today, is for council to consider that.
I think one of the things, if you went through the whole packet that I found, Mike, is either way, the costs are going to be higher. This is that continuing examination of how we give a long-term viable fire and EMS service to the citizens of Arlington. And as we look ahead in our projections, even like we're okay right now, but we can't sustain that into the future as the costs continue to rise. So it's just one more thing we're examining.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions on that first assumption on the slide? Seeing generally no. All right, Paul, you want to carry on?
The second assumption is the reduction in the fire and EMS expenses have been factored into these calculations. So what we're saying is that as we run through these scenarios that are taxpayer-based scenarios and looking at the general fund, those general fund number assumptions that you're going to be seeing are the best information we have right now on 2022, and that we have removed the cost of the fire and EMS services in there. So there's no nothing in the background that's still looming in there. Does that make sense?
Anybody with any questions about that assumption?
Mm.
Okay.
The next one is that the financial information we focused on for discussion today is based on impacts to the taxpayer, because that's what we heard from council, that council wanted to look at as soon as we could have that information available.
Any questions, comments on that one? All right.
And then the last one on this page is we're not focusing on the EMS levy. It is factored into our discussion today. However, we're not looking at different scenarios with the EMS levy because for all practical purposes, whether the EMS services are provided by the city of Arlington or provided by the RFA, there is a EMS levy rate that applies to that. It is virtually within a couple of pennies of being the same.
Okay. Everybody clear on all of those assumptions and
Yes.
where we're starting? Okay.
If you look at page 4, we're making it a statement based on the information that we have right now, looking at the impact to the taxpayers, that there is no path forward for the RFA or for the city to provide the fire and EMS services that doesn't have an impact to the taxpayer that would not hurt the general fund substantially. Even if we decided against pursuing the annexation, there would be some kind of tax increase in order for, there would be some kind of an increase to the taxpayer in order to cover the costs of providing the fire and EMS services. Because if we did nothing at all, the costs still increase annually at a far greater rate than our revenues do. Does that make sense to everybody?
And I guess, Paul, and I understand, you're just saying labor costs, but in my mind, with all of the new housing units coming in, then our city numbers are growing. And so it's not just labor costs, it's the fact that we've got more people and that we will have more calls out, in my mind anyway.
And we'll talk about that as part of, as we run through these scenarios, is that if you think back to the last council retreat we had when we discussed the fire service and public safety in general, we laid out a plan for both sectors of public safety, police and fire EMS, that incrementally added some resources to both of those departments in order to be able to cover just the growing amount of call volume and need for services. So we'll discuss that in a little bit, and that does play a factor in this, particularly if we opted not to go with the annexation.
Okay, thank you.
On page 5, we made an assumption here that we want to start out as our baseline for the scenarios as we move through them. And that is that the average home value in Arlington is $360,000. The combined rate for the RFA, that's their fire levy and their EMS levy, is equivalent is $1.82 per thousand. So based on a $360,000 home, there's a $655.20. I get that right the third try. Cost to the taxpayers for the annexation to fund the fire and EMS services. So all of our scenarios are based on that value evaluation.
I have a question on that one. On the page 24, where you have the different columns, annexation, neutral annexation, reduce, and so on. When I look at when I go down the column there, it says annual cost, home value, $360,000. I'm assuming that is referring to what you've just discussed. Is that correct?
Yeah, as the costs that we're basing those projections on, yes.
Yeah. And so when I go across, all the values that I see to the home, or the cost to the homeowner, are quite a bit larger than $655.20. They go anywhere from $770.40 all the way up to $1,130.40. So I don't understand why these numbers are so much different than the base one that you just, is there something? I mean, there must be other costs here that are adding up to increase that cost to the taxpayer.
Yeah, I think if you as we go through the scenarios, that might become more understandable to you. If not, we can stop on each one and kind of go through. And Kristen's got a great handle on.
Basically, what you're seeing there is the cost of the fire and EMS plus the cost of the Arlington property tax. So you're seeing a combined figure there, Mike, in the cost to the taxpayer, because we're filtering in the property tax levy for the city.
I see. So there's an addition here other than just the RFA. Okay. Let's see. Is that all right? Okay. Continue on. Thank you.
Okay, on page 6, we start our first scenario with the looking at the property tax and the RFA combined. This scenario represents no change to the Arlington tax rate. I guess I should stop and say that also on this, the ambulance utility fee, I failed to mention earlier that as we walk through these scenarios, annexation into the RFA would mean that our ambulance utility fee goes away. That is limited to just something that cities can do to fund their EMS system. It wouldn't be transferable to the RFA. So that is an item that was factored in. So I want to just point that out as we walk through them.
Also point out that, Mike, as you referenced on page 24 of your packets, the financial scenarios Paul's about to walk through, it might be helpful for you to pull that page aside because he's going to walk through each one of those
Okay,
scenarios.
got it. Yeah, I've got it out.
So this first scenario represents no change to the city's property tax rate. The city's property tax rate is $1.32 per thousand. And then it would be combined with the $1.82 from the RFA. This would have the greatest impact on the taxpayers. It would add 2.3, a little better than $2.3 million to the city's general fund because we wouldn't have the expenses of running the fire and EMS system. However, it would cost the taxpayers equivalent of an additional $475 per year plus the $655 for the RFA.
So Paul, when I was looking at this earlier, what I was doing was then subtracting $180, which is the annual cost of the ambulance utility fee. Is that already taken out in these numbers, like on the examples, or would I just continue in my head to take that $180 annual fee out since it'll stop?
No, that the ambulance utility fee has been taken out of those figures.
Okay.
So the picture that we're creating here is you've got choices from one end of the spectrum to the other. And so rather than you could model it with any number that you wanted, what we did is we picked several of them to model to give examples of what the council's ability could do by adjusting our property tax rate, the effect that we can have on the taxpayer. This one represents no change whatsoever. So it's the greatest impact to the taxpayer. It keeps the most money in the general fund, and the council makes no adjustment on the taxes, property taxes.
I have one quick question, Paul, on page 24 down at the bottom where it says fire department expense reduction, the $2,444,000. I was thinking that the fire department cost us more than that a year. I'm not
looking
correct
at
on that.
if you remember back from our assumptions, one of our assumptions was we weren't going to look at the EMS levy rate just because it's not regardless of whether we were in the annexation or providing the service on our own, that fee remains relatively the same. So what we're looking at in these scenarios is limited to just the fire service impacts, not what is collected from the EMS or transport fees.
Oh, okay, thank you.
It's just to simplify the formula so that it makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question, just to make sure I'm looking at the right column. So this first scenario that you've read, Paul, to us on page 6 is basically column D.
That's correct. And we are bouncing around on those columns, but there really is kind of a methodology to it when we get to the end.
Okay.
So I apologize if it's confusing right now, but I think it'll make more sense as we kind of walk through this.
Thank you.
So what we did was if you look at page 7, we modeled a scenario with a 50 cent per thousand reduction in the city's property tax rate and what that kind of an impact that had. So still no ambulance utility fee, because like we talked about, that goes away with an annexation into the RFA. The city's general fund would increase by 677,864 to be exact, due to the cost of not having to run the fire and EMS services. The average house would pay $295 extra annually. That makes sense in that scenario.
Yes.
And then on page 8, we're moving to the, now we're kind of moving down. So we started out with council taking no action. What if we, 50-cent reduction? So this is scenario runs if we took $1 reduction in the city's property tax rate. This has the most impactful. Again, no ambulance utility fee would be collected, so that would be a reduction. The city's general fund would lose just a hair over $1 million a year with that scenario. And the taxpayer would have zero out-of-pocket expenses, zero additional, expenses.
Could I elaborate and make a kind of a question on that? So you take basically everything out of the general fund, the taxpayers don't pay anything, but then the city can't do anything. Am I thinking correctly?
Yeah, we would have to absorb $1 million hit to the general fund. So that's, that'd be service reductions in other areas.
I just think it's important to state the reality of that in services. So
Yes.
Kind of like, what's the point?
exactly.
Why would we?
That would be a catastrophic hit to our general fund.
That would be worse than the recession.
Not quite, but it would be definitely a hurt.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
So if you take a look at page 9, this scenario we looked at was kind of middle of the road. What could we do that wouldn't harm the general fund and would be the least harmful to the taxpayer? So we looked at a 63 cents per thousand reduction in the city's property tax rate. The general fund would see a gain of $40,171, which is noted in here just less than 1% of our general fund budget. Taxpayers would see an increase of $226.80 per year. But this was a scenario that had the least amount of impact to the taxpayer without having catastrophic damage to the general fund.
This may be semantics, Paul, but I'm going to maybe correct a word you used, because I heard you use the word harm the taxpayer. So I don't believe in that when the taxpayer pays a tax, it's not that they're not getting anything. So I just caution us with that kind of verbiage, because we're lessening the effect maybe of what they're having to pay here. I don't think it's a harm to them.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Good point.
Yeah,
we want
that
to show
is.
that we're sympathetic to, tax increases, but
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. The services, they cost money, and somehow those funds have to be raised if we want the services.
Exactly. Thank you.
It would be like a financial impact to the taxpayer.
Right.
Yes.
Before we move on, I just want to make sure everyone feel like you have a good handle on this, these 4 scenarios that Paul's just reviewed with you and the differences between them. A nod or thumbs up. Okay,
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, please?
absolutely.
All right. So I understand the differences between them, but as I've read these, what I've tried to do in my mind is to think future needs of the city and the cost of things. And so kind of between B and C, I've been looking at. And also, I know you're going to be approaching the puzzle pieces later on, but that may take, for us to maybe have equity. If the citizens choose to go with the RFA, we might need to come up with some money or different things to equalize this merger. And so I guess maybe my question will be directed towards Kristen as we continue in the conversation to know, how are these two bottom line numbers for the city budget going to affect us in the long run, say maybe 5-10 years out, and the needs of running the city? So I don't know that there's an answer right now, but I just want you to know kind of where my mind is as we're thinking about these things. Thank you.
Mhm.
Done.
One concern I've been thinking about too is how we didn't do the 1% increase this year on taxes, and we tabled it for possibly next year. I'm concerned about how the citizens are going to take if next year all of a sudden we come back and we do need that 2%. And they start throwing this at us.
It's a reasonable concern.
It is.
Absolutely.
It's a reasonable concern.
And one of the things is you will have, our next retreat is going to be working around the budget for 2021 and 2022. And in order for Kristen to bring us a realistic budget, that's why we need to sort of figure out the direction from this here today. So we can factor in all of those things based on which direction we're going to run the numbers for.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm reminding everybody about that.
But this is property tax. So let's just say the C column, 677,000. Won't that grow each year as more building and complex come in?
Yeah, which one are you referring to?
Well, actually, any of them. Won't those figures go up as more people are paying property tax with all the new construction, the manufacturing, the homes that are coming in?
I mean, as the valuations increase, that's
Right.
definitely a potential, but you have to remember, because of the 1% limitation, what happens is actually the rate goes down so that we
Oh,
more than 1%. So it's not a straight across the board. It went up this much, so we'll collect that many more taxes. That limitation is what, and what happens is then the rate of $1.32, slides down to $1.30 because the valuations went up. So we can't collect more than 1% more than the previous year.
okay. Thank you. I totally forgot that.
I think
Yeah,
that already happened here because last time I looked at property tax rate, it was $1.64 for Arlington, and now it's $1.32. So apparently that already occurred with the increased valuations of the properties.
Yeah, I mean, the reality doesn't hit the homeowner quite so much because they, they still paid 1% roughly more than they did the year before when the council takes that, but it limits really what the general fund will realize out of it.
And if I may, just to kind of put some dollars to Jan's question. So our 1% in our general fund is usually about 45,000 per year if we take the 1%. Our highest year, at least since I've been here in the last 5 years, based on construction value, gave us an additional, 90,000. So, we're looking at less than $200,000 in a very good construction value year, which really, for all intents and purposes, is barely in 1 FTE for, say, public safety. So normally it's less than 100,000 that we get with the 1% plus new construction.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions before we move on?
Great questions.
Yeah. If you look at page 11, we also modeled some cost impacts if we were decided to not go any farther forward with the RFA discussions and looked at keeping the fire and EMS in-house. As you recall, or may recall, when we had a retreat and we talked about the ambulance utility fee and we set the rate of $15, we talked about that rate was going to reach a point in time when it no longer would be sufficient to cover the cost impacts, because it is a stagnant funding source. It never goes, it doesn't go up on its own. There's no cost of living increases with it. And when we set that, of course, in the first few years, our reserve funds built up a little bit faster. And as expenses rise, we reach kind of a point of equilibrium where the cost is neutral. And then from then on, the cost starts outpacing the funds, and you start degrading the ending fund balance or your reserve fund. So there was always a point in time there we knew we had projected out where the ambulance utility fee would need to be raised. And we really are at that point as we look forward into 2022 and the area where we're talking about the joining the RFA. So in this scenario, just to keep all things on par so that no increases to resources, just to cover the additional expenses of running the EMS system, we'd be looking at moving the ambulance utility fee from $15 to $22 per month. If we work towards progressing towards the council's goals, as we talked about a little bit earlier, when we did this, we set some goals for both sectors of public safety, fire, EMS, and police. And one of those goals is that we knew that we would need to add a second BLS unit, as their current BLS unit is reaching saturation. So at a minimum, we would need to increase that. We also have a need for command and control. We've been successful with being able to outsource that to Marysville, but that's not always going to be the case. So if we factor those two into the ambulance utility fee, we'd be looking at a scenario of $30 a month increase from $15 a month in order to cover those additional resource expenses moving forward.
Deborah, you're speaking, but you're on mute.
Sorry. So just to make sure I heard you correctly, if we went to, in 2022, to $30 a month for the ambulance utility fee, that would cover both the labor costs going up and then the BLS unit and command and control.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just as a comparison, so that cost would be when you would actually be an additional $40.80 to the taxpayer when you factor in the rise in the ambulance utility fee.
How does that happen if it's $30 a month? How is it just $40.80 annually?
Let me look at, Kristen could probably answer that faster. I have to look at the chart.
It would actually be, if you're looking at where we are now, it would be 136.80. I think you were looking at column E and F. You need to compare column E and G for the $30, which is an additional $136.80. If we went up to $30.
I'm not understanding.
That's on page 13.
$30 a month for 12 months is $360.
You're just comparing the difference in
It's
cost.
just the difference in cost, not the total cost.
Okay.
Yeah,
I thought
so
you were
comparing the $810 where we are in 2020 versus if we go to the council's goals of the BLS and command and control of the 946.80. So the difference between 946.80 and 810 is the 136.80.
Where are you?
So we'd be looking at a different chart. I'm completely lost. I'm
Yeah.
where you just went.
On page 25.
Kristen,
I don't,
could you just
I
run
think-
through that again for us?
okay, so if we're on page 25.
Yes.
Okay, so we're looking at column E. So we're trying to determine what our total cost would be today, which with the ambulance utility fee is $15 per month. That's a total with the EMS levy, the property tax levy, and the AUF of $810. Is everyone with me on that?
Yes.
Okay, so then on slide 11, Paul was talking about if we're projecting what our cost might look like in 2022, if we kind of held the line and did not implement the council goals of the BLS and the command and control, what would our costs look like in 2022? So that's where we looked at the projection, and we would need to increase our ambulance utility fee to $22 a month. So we look at what our potential levy would be in 2022, which is the $1.63 plus the AUF at $22 a month, brings the total cost down to $850.80.
That's the cost to the taxpayer.
Cost to the taxpayer, correct.
Thank you.
So then the next column, column G, is we're still in 2022, but now let's try to compare what the service benefits would be if we went to the RFA. That's where we add in the additional BLS unit, the command and control, and that would bring the ambulance utility fee up to $30 for a total cost to the taxpayer with the EMS levy, the property tax levy, to $946.80
Okay.
under the no annexation scenario. Did that help?
Oh, yeah, I got it. I figured out where the $40.80 is. Thank you.
Yes.
So basically we should compare the estimated cost, the levy and the AUF on page 25 to the annual cost to the homeowner on page 24 to understand the difference between all the scenarios.
Yes, which we do when we get to page 14 in the slides. I don't think Paul we haven't got there yet.
We got that
We
far, but
jumped
yes.
ahead.
Well, we can go there now because that's correct. So if you look at, we're starting to break this down into a baseline and a side-by-side comparison. So if you were to look at column B and the costs of $226.80, that represents the scenario of annexing into the RFA and the cost to the taxpayer, the additional cost to the taxpayer. Column G to the taxpayer is $136.80. That's just what Kristen talked about of not annexing in, but raising our ambulance utility fee to $30 a month. Would have an additional annual cost to the taxpayer of $136.80. That makes sense? So we're just pulling those two together so you can look at them side by side.
Paul, I'm not sure if I'm looking at an earlier version of this or if the council's slides is the same. The 136.80, does everyone have that figure shown on their page 25 below the tables? Okay, then it's I'm looking at an earlier version, so.
Me too, because
Yeah.
mine says 96.
That's where
Yeah, mine
Karen and I
says
got mixed up.
Well, the 96 is a different number. I was comparing something different there. That's between, or did I not update that?
Is that between F and G?
That's status quo.
Yes,
It's not.
it's between F and G.
Now that's a confusing couple of minutes we went through there. I just want to stop and make sure that council, do you have any questions? We've all sort of had a few questions so we can get oriented, but I want to make sure you guys are all still with us.
Okay, I just have one. Okay, so column C on page 24, which the cost to the taxpayer is $950.40, would equate to almost on page 25, column G, if we raised the ambulance utility fee.
Correct.
But we wouldn't be getting all the additional things that we would be getting if we did the RFA.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Makes sense to me.
Excuse me, what was the last column on page 25? The last column you mentioned, Jan, that you were.
It's under G, and yeah.
'Cause that would give everything that you get with the RFA, because you're adding in the command and control and the BLS, which was kind of the whole point of the RFA, right? So actually you are comparing apples to apples there, aren't you?
Well,
No,
not-
we're getting close, but no.
No, not necessarily. There's a whole lot more.
I think what
to
Mike is
the
doing
RFA.
is reading the header, which it says BLS, command and control, and the estimated cost to the taxpayers. So in that scenario, I read it the same as Mike is seeing that we would have to raise the ambulance utility fee to $30 a month to get those benefits we would get for less cost to the taxpayer through the annexation.
But can I interject? So what I'm thinking, because I read the whole packet, is there's a lot more being brought to the table than just the BLS and command and control in an RFA. And even
Yes.
reading the letter from the union tells me that. So
Yeah.
I don't think it is comparing apples to apples.
No, and I didn't want to represent that the BLS unit and the command and control was comparing apples to apples with the RFA. What I want to make clear is that those are items that we decided when we laid out a plan for all of public safety, that those were items we knew in the near future needed to be, we needed to create resources for those to cover the extra workload.
Thank you.
And that we haven't, the command and control, we haven't completely replaced all of, our command and control that we even had during the downturn when we had to reduce administration. If you go to slide 15, that takes it just kind of a step farther forward, just in the comparison of those two from 14. And just breaks it down that the difference, you're looking at a difference between the RFA annexation and the comparable that we did on slide 14 and the ambulance utility fee. You're looking at a $90 a year difference, which equates to $7.50 a month. So just wanted to finish that comparison so that you could look at it from what the taxpayer would see.
Okay, wait just a second. So you're looking at column B, right? And comparing that as opposed to column C.
Yeah, what we did is on slide 14, we're looking at the impacts to taxpayers for column B and the impacts to taxpayers for column G. And then on slide 15, we just take the difference between those two, which ends up being $90 a year. So that's really what the difference. You know that from the beginning, we talked about there's no way path forward that doesn't have a cost impact to the taxpayers. So what this does is it's the final slide that shows you what the cost impacts to the taxpayers are based on looking at scenario B or scenario G.
So is it possible to get that same comparison using column C as opposed to B?
We can put that together for you.
Yeah, I'd like
We don't
to-
have it here today, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess the question I have, it looks, I just need to hear one more time the apples to apples comparison between, that I guess isn't apples to apples, but the difference between G and B, I guess it is, yeah, the difference between, in terms of service, in terms of providing the service to our residents, what is the difference between having the annexation and not having the annexation with the addition of the command and control, and what was the other thing? BLS. Could I hear that one?
I'm going to ask Chief Kraske
to do that once, but I didn't quite catch it.
I'm going to ask Chief Kraske to help address this because he's the chief. He's been working on the operations side of this with North County Fire.
Thank you, Paul. I've been kind of biting my tongue here for the last few minutes. We throw out the term command and control a lot, and it's really important that the council understands what that is. So in the fire service, command and control is a 24-hour battalion chief that is on duty and is generally the first person to respond to like a working fire to an incident. So that person in a vehicle that moves quicker, more agile, faster, they get to the scene, they do a 360, they size it up, they decide what needs to be done. So as crews arrive, they start delegating what needs to be done. In this scenario that Kristen and Paul put together, the command and control piece is really just adding back that third chief officer to the department that we let go back in like 2012. So it's not the same thing. It's important for everybody to realize that. Yes, we're adding to our command staff, but it's not providing a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week command and control presence that the RFA will do. Make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Marilyn, you've got a question?
Not a question, just a statement, I guess, that would help Mike when you're comparing. One thing that I always like to keep in mind is that if you go with the RFA, the voters have the choice of voting their tax increase. If you go with the city council imposing and increasing the ambulance utility fee, that's a council decision. So to me, it's a very big deal that the public have the opportunity to vote for this instead of us just imposing the additional cost.
Well, I agree with you totally, Marilyn, on that. That was one of my complaints last time when we did the ambulance utility fee. Was that
right? And that was an emergency thing, and that it's just not, in my opinion, it's not the best way to go. It's better to have tax increases to be voter approved.
I agree.
Okay.
Don?
So Mike, even though you're getting the same thing either way, it's just, how do you get it? Do you get it, if you go to the RFA and you get all the stuff you want, the voters voted for it. If you go with staying with the city, you're going to get the same, not exactly the same, but you're going to get increases that are imposed rather than voted on.
Yeah, the difference is, well, besides the service, the difference in the service that Chief Kraske just described, there is a $90 difference between the two. And so if the city makes the decision here and doesn't do the RFA and goes with the ambulance utility increases and so on, column G, well, that saves the taxpayer $90. If you go with the voted, the RFA, then the taxpayer is going to vote for $90 more that he'll have to come up with, based upon what I see on page 14.
Either way, it's going to increase taxes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. It's matter how much.
Well, yeah.
And it's who has the say over that? Does the council impose the tax, or does the taxpayer vote to increase their own tax?
That's right.
Big deal.
Don had his hand up first, Deborah.
The one thing too I see with the RFA, and Dave, correct me if I'm incorrect, but we also it makes it easier for us to draw manpower from some of these other agencies that are involved with this, instead of having where they have the freedom right now of saying, no, we don't have the manpower we can send to help if we need it.
True. On emergency calls and just day-to-day staffing. Example, we allowed 2 people off per day, and it doesn't create overtime. Today we had 2 people off and somebody called out sick, so we incurred 24 hours of overtime today. In a bigger pool of manpower, you would just simply move people between stations. So one station would be heavy, and you'd say somebody called out sick at station 46, we're moving 1 person there. So there's a lot of efficiencies that way.
Deborah, and then Michelle.
Well, and that, Dave, what you just said goes to what I was gonna say is, it may be $90 more, but to me, it's a better product. So I'm investing in a much better product, maybe that more complete product, maybe not better, but a more complete product for $90 rather than being stretched.
I would agree.
Thank you.
Michelle?
And then this is something that it looks like, according to the letter, that pretty much everyone's backing also, right, Dave, in the union, and I mean, it seems to have 100% almost support on it's the
Everyone's
direction that
excited
you guys
about
want to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I make one comment, kind of non-RFA? Mayor, I just sent you a text. It's non-RFA related. It has to do with a call that's happening right now. I just want to make you aware of it.
Okay, thank you.
We cover all the questions.
Next, yeah, anybody have any additional questions about sort of this bottom line analysis?
We are going to go in more in depth on what else the RFA will provide. Is that correct?
What they can provide as
Well,
far
yeah,
as
what-
service
what-
levels, resources, or
Yeah, the whole thing, because one of the lines in the written part, not your slide, said that with the RFA, if you have insurance, Medicare or Medicaid, that you would not, if you have an ambulance call, you would not be billed for co-pays. So my gosh, $90 a year, all you'd have to have is one call. I mean, so the citizens would still be saving money on if they have to use those services.
yeah, yes, and that's a difference in policies between the two organizations. We do bill people for the difference
yeah.
between what their insurance covers and what the cost of the service is. North County Fire, their policy is to not do that for residents within their service area, which if we annexed it would include, of course, would include the city limits.
Right.
Just an FYI, I think that's a good talking point for the future to let the citizens know that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I haven't used the service, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy paying in case I ever have to use it. But it would be a financial benefit, especially to those people who use it a lot.
I feel like it's going to take a lot of talent to write this up and put it on the voters pamphlet.
Oh, yeah.
One of the reasons why we're here discussing this now is because as we move forward with this, there's quite a bit of work left to do. And there's quite a bit of resources we need to help us move this forward. So this is one of several times when we're going to get together and talk about the RFA and kind of need to make a decision of whether or not we're moving in the right direction and get consensus from the council that we want to continue down this path. You've seen some scenarios here so far that, is there something here you can live with, or, are we just completely going in the wrong direction? So that we don't get farther down the road and find out that we're just, not hitting the mark.
I appreciate, Kristen, that you took the time to work out scenarios that didn't substantially increase the general fund while we were while the citizens might vote to increase their own taxes. I think that that's sensitive to our population.
Deborah, you had a comment, and then I'll circle back.
Okay, well, I wanted to ask Jessica and Marilyn. I know, Marilyn, you've already shared a little bit, so I know some of how you feel, but being that you've been in communication for several months now with people from North County, and I heard before the meeting, I think some positive comments, but I just would like your input as a fellow council person as to if you think this is a good move for us, for our citizens, and that North County would be a good partner to work with for our team.
Yeah, I feel like it's been meant to be from the beginning, honestly. I mean, as the conversations have gone on, we've seen eye to eye on things. Our goals are the same. Firefighter safety, same. So as we've been talking about it, my thoughts keep going to what the union keeps asking for. I mean, they want the command control. There's quite a few positions we don't have filled that they're feeling. And so I feel like the RFA meets that need. And then the other big thing that Marilyn and I totally agree on is getting rid of this ambulance utility fee. I mean, it's always been the goal since the beginning that it be a temporary fee. So this is our way of filtering out every single option we can to try to get the cost down as much as possible, but still offer all the services and needs that the department has, but remove this fee. So that's kind of where I sit.
Thank you. That helps.
Oh.
Is there somebody talking? I'm not hearing anything right now.
Oh, no, Brian came on and said to stand by.
And we lost Council Chambers.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
We could have a party without him.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Finish eating my cookie now.
All right.
Oh, there they are.
We're back.
We're back.
Yeah, you guys may not have left the meeting, but we apparently did temporarily, but we're back.
And Jessica, it just cut you off, whatever you were saying. We missed most all of it.
Was really good. Everybody was crying.
Lots of applaud.
Clapping.
I'm just gonna have to go to the tape to hear it.
Basically, I just said I'm in support of it for all of the positions we need and to remove the ambulance utility fee.
Thank you.
Anybody else have comments or questions? I guess I want to make sure that when we're asking you the question about whether you're comfortable with the potential of a $90 a year increase to gain the benefits of the RFA annexation, does everybody feel like they're comfortable knowing what those benefits are? We've talked about some of those, and everybody understand kind of where we are in terms of this analysis. And maybe I guess the next step for us is to kind of have the council members respond in a general way to that question. Are you comfortable with the concept of a potential net increase to gain those benefits? And I'll I'll just call you in order that I see you on my screen. Deborah, you're first in line.
Yes, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay. Don?
Yes, I'm comfortable with it.
Okay. And Jan?
Yes, I'm comfortable.
Marilyn?
You're very comfortable.
Jessica? You already said, I think, what you had to say.
I'm comfortable with it being voter approved.
Exactly. Okay. Michelle?
I am comfortable with that.
Last but not least, Mike?
Well, I'm not too comfortable with the $90 increase, but if it's voter approved, that eases my comfort greatly.
All right. Chief Kraske, anything you'd like to add at this point in time? You're still mute, but
No, not unless there's any more questions from council.
okay. All right, Paul.
Okay, well, just really, that was a big section of this that I was unclear about how long we'd have to discuss it. So, but it was a big portion of this. The next few slides I'm going to go over is really things that I just want to make you aware of that we're working on, that the committee's been talking about, and these are things that'll come forward to you as they model out. And one of them, like we said, is that we have not really started the modeling of the finances of the new RFA, but there is some things that we're looking at. One of which is contract negotiations that, of course, both labor groups would have some negotiation in their contracts. We're creating a larger entity. That would mean that there'd be new comps to compare their salary and benefits with. So we're anticipating a range based on what we've looked at so far for both wage increase and benefit cost increase. Those wage increases could be anywhere from 4 to 10%, based on the entities that would be in the new comps, and the benefit costs could increase anywhere from no increase at all up to about 5.5%. So those are some of the things we're going to factor into those cost projections when we look at combining and making the new entity.
Is there a possibility? Are you saying that the numbers you presented us today could change?
We didn't look at any of those numbers today. All we looked at was it from the taxpayer. These are assumptions that'll have to go in that will model whether or not the RFA financially is feasible based on the tax collection that they have. And some asset pieces that council is going to have to discuss as we move through this is debt on the fire stations. We'll be bringing forward some options on that, but we have debt on our fire stations, and how we would treat that debt and how we would transfer those assets. Book values on the vehicles. Of course, that's another thing we'd be looking at is our vehicles and the value of them and how that works. Employee liabilities. That's referring, we have some liabilities associated with the employees that we would be transferring to the RFA. We have a tendered group of employees in the fire station and the EMS system. And so there would be some liabilities such as retirement, things where people would have some payouts if they retired or left their service. Administrative support, we've had some conversations about our HR department helping, at least in the transition, their HR department. There's a lot of work there to transfer over those benefits and those employees to the new entity, along with some IT services and some different things that we could, again, do some shared services. Reserves, if you turn the page to page 18, reserve funds is something that we're going to have to consider. So just want to make council aware. So this is in the back of your mind. The RFA currently, their policy is that they keep 25% of their annual operating cost in reserve funds. So currently, the RFA has $2.6 million in their reserve fund. Presumably, with the annexation, the organization would double in size, meaning that there would be a need to increase their reserve fund from that 2.6 million to somewhere around 5.2 million. This is a point that's a little bit difficult for a city because we don't keep reserve funds by department. Our reserve funds are citywide. And so we're fairly limited. We have about $1.2 million in reserve funds within the fire department. That's reserve funds for our EMS system and some money in the equipment replacement fund. But if you turn your page, the math for that is on page 19 and kind of gives you an idea of the numbers and what the gap would look like. So there's a gap of about 1.4 million that we would have to decide how we create equity in that transfer. On page 20, government structure. This is something that the committee's been discussing the last few meetings, is how to create the government structure and how that works moving forward. The committee has come up with a proposed structure that currently the RFA has 6 positions. They have 7 actual seats. They reduced by 1 in anticipation of these conversations with us annexing in and knowing that we were going to need to make some adjustments in their governance. So what the committee has come up with is to initially have a board of 9. The 6 that are currently on the North County Regional Fire Authority board, and 3 that would be council members from Arlington that would sit on the board on a temporary basis. As the election processes came up, those would move from being an appointed position to an elected position and would reduce down from 9 down to 7.
Deborah, you had a question.
Yes, back to page 19, Paul, and at the bottom where it says what assets and/or services could we negotiate to avoid closing the gap with cash? Could you just give me an example of what possibilities there are with that?
Well, there'd be, anything from we could retain, say on station 46, and I bring up fire station 46 because it's not the best fire station in the world. The truck bays are pretty small. It's close to the road, makes it very difficult for the newer, larger equipment to get it in and out. Anytime every morning when the crews do truck checks, they pull the trucks out of the bays, they're blocking the road. So it's not the greatest fire station. However, we did do a big renovation on it a few years ago and added the new, sleeping quarter and day room and things. And when we did that design, we knew at the time that it probably wouldn't remain a fire station forever and might be an opportunity for some other function. So I bring that up as an opportunity for some flexibility with North County. There could be room there where we retain the debt on that building and actually retain the building and have some kind of a lease or use agreement with North County where they could use it for a particular period of time until they could build a fire station that would be more suitable to the needs and meet growth projections and response times better than Station 46 could. And then, we could do something different with that fire station, use it for public offices or something. That's one example of it. Different mixtures of how we could retain debt or transfer assets over to close the gap.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Michelle, I think you were next.
Yeah, Are we looking at eliminating any staff from our current Arlington Fire Department if this were to go through, or are we going to keep everybody?
No, part of that, and that was a conversation piece that came up that was very important to the committee. And yes, that's part of the agreement is that all staff in good standing, which is everyone in our organization at this present time, would transfer over to the RFA.
Okay, when I was campaigning and I was invited to speak to the union, that was something that I heard some conversation on. If this happened in the future, there was a little concern that maybe positions would be eliminated. So that's really good to hear. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll let Chief Kraske comment on that. He's been, like I said, working on the operations piece of it. From everything that he's reported back to me, there certainly won't be a need for any staff reductions. We're probably looking at, some increases of different, or reorganizing of different work packages.
Okay.
Michelle, Paul has summarized that very well. There will be no reductions in our staff, and if the RFA moves through and the community votes positively for it, there'll be some additions to staffing fairly quickly.
Wonderful, thank you.
So I have a question. So combining the two, and we go to the RFA, and information that Paul had sent out, I don't know, a month or so ago, I saw something about only one fire chief. So Dave, where exactly is that? Because I'm not real comfortable.
It's a good question, Jan. And Chief Cermak and I are very comfortable with this. North County just renewed his contract. So he is, I believe he has a 4 or 5 year contract. So this is happening. This will become effective in January of 22. So he would be the fire chief at the day of conception. And then he would probably have like a 1 to 2 year phase out after that. So it would be a nice transition that we're both very comfortable with.
Well, that doesn't mean, so what would your position be? And that's not less salary, right?
We haven't even talked salaries, but I would be an assistant chief to him for those couple of years because we're stepping into an organization that here in the city, we have Kristen and her staff that does our finance, James and his staff that does our human resources. In an RFA, they're all inclusive. So they have their own finance department, their own HR. So there'd be a little bit of a learning curve for me also. So it'd be a nice couple year transition.
Okay.
I feel like you've been the face of Arlington for the fire department for quite some time now. And I think, Jan, with your concern is that I would not want to lose that for Arlington. I think that that's really important to keep that face. And I get that everyone's comfortable, but I think it sends a great message to keep you there as chief, but.
And I think you would see that, Michelle. So currently, when Stanwood annexed into the RFA, Chief Cermak continues to go to like the weekly directors meeting in Stanwood. He attends the council meetings. He's a very visible face, even though he's not part of that governmental structure in Stanwood. We would want that same thing here in Arlington. So what we'd probably do is probably start being seen in both communities. I would be seen in Arlington and Stanwood, and he would be seen in Arlington and Stanwood. We would want to still very much be a part of the council and the community and know what's going on.
It'd be important to our community to feel like that culture that they've been able to rely on and that has given them comfort over the years, that the faces would be the same and that the connection to the community would be the same.
I know, I guess we're just not willing to let you go, Dave.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other questions I can answer? Thank you.
Walk through the check-in.
So we're at page 21 in the slide deck, if you will, and we're just going to go through these questions again. I'll look to each of you kind of for your responses. First of all, is everybody again feeling comfortable with why we're considering this? Any questions that anybody has about that particular issue? I'm going to take your lack of hands up and comments as saying everybody's okay with that concept at this point in time. So the next question on the list is anyone uncomfortable with the idea of moving the fire department control to the RFA? That's sort of a command structure question. But note that what the RFA has committed to doing is co-branding and supporting the fire department's outreach that we currently provide. Everyone's okay with that as a concept?
Yep.
I'd like to put a caveat, as long as Chief Kresge is still the face and the command of the Arlington firefighters and EMS, because I think he's done an outstanding job of building trust with that group and seeing to their safety.
So I have one thing. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dwell on this, but if Dave moves to the quote assistant position, I'm sure the RFA has their own salary schedule and everything, but I'm not comfortable if he ends up making less. That's just my opinion.
Jan, I appreciate that. And we haven't talked salaries yet, but in other organizations that have gone through this, there's not been any salary reductions. If anything, that somebody's pay may be kind of frozen until COLAs and that things catch up. But I don't expect any reductions or anything.
Also, Jan, one thing that we talked about too with that is we're not going to get a ton into the salaries. I mean, we'll definitely try to make sure things are comparable going in, but the leadership of the RFA would determine that.
Yes.
I hate to see us try to micromanage. I mean, I agree, and I think it's a very loyal statement towards Dave and our fire department, but this is a business merger and you have to allow it to do its due process and not try to control it. So I think we need to be cautious.
Michelle, you had a comment?
Yeah, in response to Barb's comment, I guess I feel really strongly about the Dave situation also. And I think that when you hear the people on this call or meeting talk about it, I just wonder, as people are voting, I would imagine that that question would come up, especially that those that are very involved in our community. I don't want to see a change with that at all. And it's not, I get business decisions, and I think that I'm good with business decisions, but I also know that there's a people component in there, and for things to transition and go well and for it to be accepted, sometimes there is a people component in there, and maybe Dave is that people component out there in our community. So I'm just gonna say it again, along with a couple other of you. I think that's a critical piece to this. And I'm not talking salary or vacation or anything like that. Dave can work that deal for himself. I think he's pretty competent to get what he wants out of that. But I think the people portion of this and the impact on the community, if he weren't to be around. So.
I agree, Michelle. And I would just say, I was saying what I said because Marilyn and Jessica are here and there are representatives at the table. And I think there's value in them hearing from us on those thoughts as they move forward.
The next question is kind of a loaded question for the way it's written. Is everyone thrilled at having a financially stable way to discontinue the ambulance utility fee and the EMS levy? I guess, is there anything about that process that anyone has any concerns about? Maybe a different way of saying it.
Maybe I would say it a different way. It doesn't seem like our citizens ever understood the reason for the ambulance utility fee and didn't like it connected to their general utility bills. And so to have a very understandable way their taxes are being paid and how they go to something, I think would be of value.
I totally agree. It's so challenging to try to explain that ambulance utility fee to people. I mean, it's just confusing and people don't like it. So I think this will be a voter approval. I think that's key here.
I agree with Marilyn on that one.
I knew you would, Mike.
No, that's the best part of this. It's going to be a voter approval process. That's what I like about it.
Last question for the council, I think, at least before we move forward, is do you think with all of this information that's been presented, there is a financial scenario that you find you could support in terms of moving forward with the RFA discussions? That's essentially, that's why we're here today, is to find out how comfortable you council members are. And I think this one I might just kind of go through the list as well. Deborah, what are your reactions to that question?
Well, I'm looking at the chart on page 24, and I'm comfortable with B and C, or somewhere in between there. And I'm also comfortable knowing that we have Kristen Garcia working with Marilyn and Jessica on this, and Paul, to bring us something here. I don't want to see our general fund going under, but I don't want to see a exorbitant cost to the taxpayer either. So that would be my preference, is between B and C.
All right, Don, your thoughts?
No, right there with Deborah, I agree. Right, B and C, them columns there to give the least impact to them, and I think will help us sell this.
Jan, what about your thoughts? You're on mute still.
Sorry about that. I'm with B and C also. The thing about C, and I had asked Kristen earlier before we started the meeting, how much our loan payment for the new fire station would be. And she said it was $343,000 a year, which included the interest. So I guess with that amount for the fire station, I probably would lean toward C a little bit more, but I would go with B or C.
Marilyn?
Well, I was leaning toward C, actually. B is fine, or somewhere in between, but we need to have it work out so that we're not without funds in our general fund. We need to keep that, some of it anyway, so we can do other things.
I agree.
Jessica?
I'm similar to that. I don't know if the exact numbers of B or C are what we need. One thing we've briefly touched on at our last meeting was finding out what those costs would actually cover. And so that way it's not just an arbitrary number, that it actually goes towards specific services that we're going to be needing over the next couple of years. So.
Right, understood. And Michelle?
When I read all this the first time and then had to go back a second time to look at it, and then after today's meeting, I'm just sticking with C. I feel like C, for me, I think it gives us, the general fund, a little bit more flexibility with what they'd have to utilize in the future.
Okay, Mike?
Well, I'm most comfortable with just B. I'm really sensitive right now to the taxpayer because, we haven't talked about this, but this COVID thing that we're all going through, this pandemic thing, and possible depression and all of that. And I don't know how anxious people are going to be to increase their taxes in the first place. They never are, but they might even be less so now. And I don't think that we should be padding or trying to increase our general fund. I'd just like to hold the line on keeping the general fund the way it is, not having it reduced, and try to get the best deal for the taxpayer. And when I look at B and C, I see most of you would kind of lean toward B and C, and maybe even C. I see the cost of the homeowner for B is $882, and for C it's $950. It's not a huge difference, but it is some. So I for those reasons, I would be most comfortable with B.
I think that gives Paul and the staff a pretty good sense of where the council is as we started this session by noting that these financial assumptions are still unrefined. There's still a lot of work staff has to do to figure out what those exact numbers mean and what they would cover. But I'm hopeful that this gives Paul and the chief and Kristen what they need in order to keep moving forward with this conversation. Paul, turn it back to you. What do you have additional questions for the council? Marilyn has her hand up, so we can take her question first.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize what Jessica said about the balance the money that we would have additional funds in our general fund. What are possibilities for using that? Why do we need that? You know, could we come up with some projects or some ideas, or how would we use that money? I think that's pretty important.
So in hearing you all say that, one of the things that I think that's really important to me in this is that there's really honesty and transparency with the taxpayer. This is about sustainability of fire and EMS services to me, and not about what other things we could do with the general fund. And I think that kind of confuses the message, and it's not really very transparent if we find ways to get extra money in the general fund unless it's very clear. And it would have to be clear to the taxpayers who would vote on this what that's for.
Marilyn, go ahead.
Well, I agree, but I don't want to have no answer when people say, well, then you'll have additional money in the general fund. What are you going to do with it? So I don't think that should be a focal point on this. I think the sustainability of the fire and EMS is the top priority, but it does leave us with additional funds in our general fund. So I personally would like to know if we have plans how we would use that. I wouldn't use it as a selling point for this, but I would like to know.
I guess that's why I would lean towards the scenario that did the least, that gave the most money back in the reduction of property tax to stabilize the general fund, to keep it from going negative, but also to give sustainability to fire and EMS.
I agree with that. I totally agree with the mayor on that.
I think, Marilyn, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that if there's a scenario that's brought forward as staff continue these conversations, part of what needs to happen is an explanation of if there's a change in the general fund, what that's going to look like to the citizens, so they know what they're purchasing if they vote in favor of the RFA. And I think Paul and Kristen and the chief will work hard to provide that information to you, again, so you can make those choices.
Exactly. Well, what aren't we doing that we could be doing because we don't have the money?
I also think we have to think about future growth, and we're going to have to hire more staff in several departments. And if we're in a negative again, we're going to be back in the situation we were a couple of years ago. So there's that to think of too.
I agree totally.
Yep.
We'll bring some scenarios forward to council for consideration, just comparison, so that you can look at that, what could be.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions on that, I'll just kind of in closing for this, over the next couple of months, we've been having, since we started this, having monthly check-in meetings with the entire council. So some of these items that we talked about, most of them will come forward to you with more information, the financial modeling, more on the governance, these holes, the things that we still need to work through will be coming to you over the next couple of months. if we continue to move forward with the RFA, which looks like we're going in the right direction, and we have a pretty good idea of where we're going to land with that, we start preparing those documents and what needs to happen there, and some legal questions answered. When the council would return from your break in September, would be the time that you would have to take formal action on putting this on the ballot, so that we could meet the deadline to get this on the ballot for February of 2021.
Council, do you have any questions, any other information that was in the packet that you received that you had questions about for staff while you have us captured and at attention to answer your questions before we adjourn for this afternoon session?
I just have one, and I have read this a couple of times. If I have a question on the written part, the part we haven't covered, but the explanations, can I send those to you, Paul?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone who has questions, please direct them to me. I'll get the answer for you.
Deborah?
Yeah, on page 30 at the top, it's about the governance. And it says, let's see, the first board election will be 2 years later, da-da-da-da. Any representation from Arlington on the board must be appointed by Arlington, and individuals appointed must be Arlington elected officials, but it doesn't really clarify other than by Arlington. So who's doing the appointing? Is it the council itself appointing council members?
Yes, we'd have to work through that, but that's presumably what would happen. And we're talking about that during that period where before those positions are elected by the public. So council would elect 3 council members to serve on the board representing Arlington initially. And then we still need to work through those details of how that works. But presumably what would happen is the positions would be staggered, and that they would come off of the board one at a time, and we would end up with a 7-member board that would have 5 districted positions and 2 at-large positions. So 5 positions would be districted for geographic areas within the RFA, including Arlington.
Mm-hmm.
And then there would be 2 positions that would be at large that could come from anywhere in the district. But similar to what we do with the council, we wouldn't want those positions to all come up for election at one time. You want staggered elections so that you always keep some continuity with the board.
Right. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions before we adjourn?
Okay, then do I do the official adjournment?
I think we're ready.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Question?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you to everybody who put information together for this discussion. It's much appreciated.
Well presented. Thank you.